Hi everyone, welcome to today's ArcGIS for Local Government meetup on the Parks Finder application. I'm Allison Muse and I'm going to be hosting today's meetup because our usual host, Heather, is presenting. I'm going to hand it over to her in just a minute, but first some housekeeping. This meetup is being recorded. We'll get the video posted to the meetup site as soon as possible after today's presentation, so if somebody needs to jump off early, you can check out meetups.com later today, and the video of the whole presentation will be up there. Second, please use your full name and preferably also your organization as your display name. That really helps us know who we're presenting to, and it also helps us match you guys up with your meetup profiles later so we can thank you guys for coming. Third, on the left side of your screen, there's a series of pods. The Q&A pod is a great way to communicate directly with me during today's presentation. It's also the best way to submit questions that you'd like Heather to answer during the breaks in her presentation. For everything else, there is the chat pod. Anything you submit in there is visible to all of the attendees, so if you have a general question that you want to throw out to the crowd, that would be the place to do that. And finally, we have muted everyone, but if you'd like during the question breaks especially to speak, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. So with all of that out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to Heather now for an introduction to the Park Finder application. Heather?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm going to mute myself now, though.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Allison, and hi, everyone. I'm sitting in a different chair today as a presenter, so I want to thank everybody for attending. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the Park Finder application allows citizens to locate park and recreational opportunities in their community. The application is typically used by parks, public works, and facility departments or other local government organizations responsible for managing park and recreational activities. On the technical side, the Park Finder application is a configuration of ArcGIS and a JavaScript application that consumes services from ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS for Server. The application must be deployed as an IIS web server, and it can be accessed on a smartphone, tablet, and desktop computers. So before I demonstrate how to configure the application, let's quickly just take a look at its functionality. So as you can see, there's 3 search options. You can search by location, name, or activity. Search by location allows the citizens to search for a park based off of an address. And once that search is completed, you'll see a 1-mile buffer has been displayed around that address. And the search results displays all of those parks within that buffer area. There's also information about the closest park. There's turn-by-turn directions and photos of the park if they're available. The other search option is to search for a park by name. Once the search is complete, a route will be drawn from your current location to the park. And then information about the park will be displayed in the info pod, as well as turn-by-turn directions and photos of the park if they are available. The final search option is by activity. So the citizens can search for 1 or more activities. And once the search is complete, a route will be drawn from your current location to the closest route that met your search criteria. And there's also a list of all of the parks that met that criteria as well. And then there's information about the park, turn-by-turn directions, and photos of the park if they're available. Citizens can also gain access to information about the park by clicking on a park point. They can also make comments about the park and rate it, as well as look at photos if they are available. Citizens can also search for parks that are near them by using the Locate button. They can change the application base map. They can share the map through social media or through email, as well as read the online help. The Park Finder is easily to configure, and requires no programming skills. I can say myself, I'm not a programmer. And you can actually configure this application to be any kind of locator application you'd want. So use the state locator application as example. The water access locator allows citizens to locate board ramps, marinas, and fishing sites within the state. And then there's also the wildlife management area where citizens can locate management wildlife areas and land for hunting within their state. So now that we have an understanding of how the application works, let's just take a look at some of its deliverables. So when you download the Park Finder, you'll find the application and the Maps and Geodatabase folder. The application folder comprises of the Park Finder folder, which contains all the files that you need to deploy this application, as well as an XML file that's used for caching the application base maps. Diving deeper into the Park Finder folder, you'll see the Images folder, which contains images that are referenced within the application and then some. And just to note that all of the park images have been provided to us by the National Park Service. If I jump back out and then jump back into the Maps and Geodatabase folder, you'll see the local government information model with contents from the city of Naperville, Illinois, as well as two base maps, the general purpose and the imagery reference overlay, and the Parks MXD as well as the Trails MXD for publishing the Parks Feature Service and the Trails Map Service. There's also a shortcut which directs you to the online help where you can learn to configure and deploy this application in your organization. So with that said, is there any questions at all, Allison, that has come in so far? Allison?
Sorry, I forgot that I'd muted myself. No, we have no questions. No questions yet.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, I do see some people are typing though, so send them in, please, and we'll address them at the next break.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll continue on. So the first step in deploying the application is to cache any of your base maps and publish any of your services that will be consumed by the application. You can use either ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS for Server. So at a minimum, base minimum, you need a Parks feature service to actually drive the application. And the Park and Recreation Areas feature class contains that information. So it has the name of the facilities and parks. It has information about the address, the operational days and hours, the URL to the park's website, as well as activities. So you can add or remove fields, which are your activities, as necessary. And also note that each of the fields are flagged by a yes or no domain. So if the activity value is yes, then the park will appear in the pop-up in the info window. So to publish the feature service using ArcGIS Online, I've logged into my ArcGIS Online organizations account. So you can go ahead and publish the service using the default name, as well as changing the capabilities to feature access. And at this point, I could go ahead and publish the feature service, but however, to save time, I've already published my feature service as well as my other services and my base maps and copied them all over to my notepad. And it's important to note that when you're copying any of your feature services that you include the index number, which is located at the very end of your feature service REST endpoint. The index number indicates the position of the layer in the map within the table of contents. So the second step in deploying the application is by configuring the configuration file to consume all of my services as well as my base maps. So if I scroll down to the base map settings, I'll go ahead and begin by adding my general purpose base map. And it's just a simple copy and paste, as well as the imagery hybrid base map as well. So as you can see, I'm kind of using a mixture of base maps. You'll see the topographic base map is actually pulling from ArcGIS Online, where the other two are cached. And you too can use a mixture of base maps, just as long as if you're using any of your own base maps, you want to ensure that they've been cached in the Web Mercator Auxiliary Sphere projection. So next I'll add my park feature service. And the park feature service will display within the application as well as used for querying parks within the application as well. So optionally, you can use a comments layer, which enables citizens to make comments about the park or its activities. You can choose to enable comments by keeping the is visible set to true or false to disable that functionality. So since I want citizens in my community to be able to make comments within my application, I'll go ahead and add my comments layer feature services to the configuration file. Another option is to include trails as features in your application as well as the reference overlay layer. You can choose to display the reference overlay layer by setting the display on load to true or false to hide it. So I'll go ahead and add my trails map service, since I want it to be displayed within my application, to the configuration file. So go ahead and scroll down, and you'll notice that there's a set of direction settings. So directions is another option that you can include in your application. It will allow the application to draw routes and provide directions using the ArcGIS Online World Service available with your ArcGIS Online Organization subscription service. So just to note, this service will consume credits when routes are generated. So to understand a little bit better about credit consumption, there's actually a link within the Park Finder Help application that to the service credit overview page, where you can learn a little bit more about credit usage. But with that said, to enable directions in the application, you can set the get directions to true. Otherwise, leave it to false if you want to disable this function. But if the get directions is set to false, this setting will actually override your get directions mobile and get directions desktop. So you might want to make note about that. However, if the get directions is set to true, you have the option to enable directions within smartphone and tablet devices using the get directions mobile, and on desktop computers using the get directions desktop. So I want to set directions in my application, so I'll set the get directions to true, as well as on desktop computers, so I'll also set that to true. The last thing you need to do is to add your geometry service, so I'll go ahead and add the ArcGIS Online geometry service. And just to note, you as well can use this geometry service, or you have the option, if you'd like, to add a geometry service from another ArcGIS server machine. So now that I'm finished configuring my configuration file, I'll go ahead and save it and close it. So the third step in the process of deploying the application is to configure the proxy file, which gives the application access to the location of the services that I've used in the configuration file. But before I start configuring it, I'll need to register my application with my ArcGIS Online organization accounts, since I have directions enabled. However, if you don't enable directions within your application, you do not need to register your application with your ArcGIS Online organizations account. So I'll go ahead and add an item, and that item will be an application. And I'll leave the web mapping as its default, and add the URL to my application. Oops. I'll leave the purpose set to ready use and the API to JavaScript. I'll add a title. And add some tags as well. So now that my item has been created, I'll go ahead and click register. And I'll register my application as a browser type and add my redirect URI. And just to note, when you're adding your redirection URI, make sure it's a fully qualified URL for your server and your web server port, which is typically port 80 and not the ArcGIS server port 6080. Don't want to get that confused. So now that my application has been registered, I'll go ahead and copy the app ID and the app secret and add it to my notepad. Okay, so now we're ready to configure our proxy file. So I'll begin by adding the URLs of each of the ArcGIS service directories that I referenced in my configuration file. So my park service as well as my trail service. And then I'll add my app ID as well. So just copy and paste it in to the client ID and the app secret into the client secret. So my proxy has been configured. I'll just go ahead and save my edits and close it. So kind of the final step in deploying the application is actually copying the Parks Finder folder and pasting it in my web server. So it can be accessed as a website or a virtual directory. Then using IIS, I'll go ahead, oops, just refresh it, and convert my Parks Finder folder to an application. So I'll go ahead and select the ASP.NET version 4.0 as the application pool. So our application's ready to view, so go ahead and take a look. And there it is. So as you can see, we deployed the application just using the Naperville data. And you can begin to configure this application using the online help and the Naperville data in your organization. And then once you're comfortable and familiar with the deployment process, you can start porting over your parks data into the ArcGIS for Local Government Information Model into the Parks feature class to drive your Parks Finder application, or you can use your own data if you prefer. But there are a few configurations that I didn't go over that you may want to consider before deploying your application. So we'll go ahead and jump back into the PowerPoint presentation. So the first setting is the general settings section, which allows you to modify the application title, the icons, the theme and color to either green, blue, or brown, as well as the splash screen, which is the message that is displayed when the application starts. You can choose to display the splash screen by setting the is visible to true or false to hide it. Next is the default extent settings, which allows you to define the geographic area visible when the application initially loads. The extent helper allows you to define your extent using the search text box by searching for a city or county, or you can use the zoom level slider to zoom into an area. Either way, once you've defined your extent, you can go ahead and copy and paste those values into your configuration folder, or file, not folder. Sorry. Next is the pop-up, the info pop-up settings, which allows you to configure the park information, such as the park's address, hours of operation, park activity, icons, and so on, that appear in the pop-up window when a park is selected, and the info pod once a search is completed. The final setting that you will want to consider changing is the locator default address, as well as the locator default feature, which is the default address and the park name in the search boxes to reflect a park and an address within your community. So some tips and takeaways for you when you're deploying the Park Finder application in your organization is to use the online help on the solution website and the Naperville data to gain an understanding of how to deploy the application from start to finish. Second, if you don't have a base map, don't worry, you can use the Esri ArcGIS Online base maps instead. However, if you do choose to cache your own base maps, you want to ensure that you're using the Web Mercator auxiliary sphere projection. And also, for all of your services as well, you want to ensure that you're using the Web Mercator auxiliary sphere projection. If you plan on using directions, make sure that you register your application with your ArcGIS Online organization account. And finally, don't forget to configure your proxy file and publish the application as a ASP.NET. But before we jump in to take a sneak peek of the next generation of the Park Finder, if there's any questions, Allison, we'll go ahead and take them. Allison?
I'm here. There have been several questions that have come in through the chat window, and Scott and Lindsay have been busy answering them. So I'm just going to read through those and summarize the questions and answers. And if anybody has any other ones, please send them in either through the Q&A box or through the chat window, and we'll get to them. So Terry asked early on, when you're searching for an activity, the restroom or whatever that first icon is always selected, and she wanted to know if there was a way for it not to be selected by default. Scott answered by pointing out that there is a option. If you have that configuration file, you can probably bring it up and show us where it is right now.
Sure, I'll go in.
Showing how to change which icons are selected by default. So you can either turn them all off or turn certain ones on. You could do that either way. So there, restroom is selected as true right now.
Yeah. So if it's default,
you remove that line or set it. Yeah, exactly. Then Karen asked if it was possible to have more than one overlay layer, for example, trails and city boundaries, and Scott answered that you could have those multiple layers in a single service and then reference that service, and that's how you could display multiple layers. Stan asked if the parks needed to be a feature service or if you could use a map service if you disabled the comments in the ratings sections so that you could run it, for example, off of a file geodatabase. And Lindsay replied that that was exactly what you could do. As long as there was no editing being used, then you could use a map service instead of a feature service. And Joshua has just asked, will a link be provided for viewing a recording of this webinar at a future date? Yes. I'll post that up on the Meetup site as soon as I can after we finish the presentation today. Does anybody have any other questions? Nope, I don't see anybody typing. Okay. Do you want to continue?
Sure. Just close some of these. Okay, so in early 2015, we're looking to deliver a newly skinned Park Finder application. So as you can see, we have a new user interface, new colors, a little bit different design. And some of the functionality that will be new to this application is the events search option. So it allows citizens to search using a calendar date. So you can put a calendar date range and search upon that. And then the My List allows citizens to add a facility or event to a list, and then they can use the reordering option. They can get directions, share it, add it to their Outlook calendar, as well as print that item. Another new add-on is the embedding options. So you can copy and paste the HTML and embed this application within your organization's website. So that's pretty cool. And then there's also a legends down here at the bottom, which allows users to understand what the symbol represents in the map. So some of the enhancements that we've included is to get directions to a facility by actually clicking on the facility and using the Directions tab. And then you'll notice the base map widget is no longer a part of the header. It's actually over here by the zoom button. So you can click on the base map thumbnail to switch the maps, or switch the application's base map. There's also a unified search. So instead of having to search by location or a park name, we actually combined it into a single search. So you can search for either or. So that pretty much concludes the presentation. If there's any other questions, feel free to submit them.
Yeah, if anybody has any other questions, no more have been submitted. But you can either unmute yourself by pressing *6 if you called in, or send them in through the Q&A window or the chat panel. Does anybody have any implementations of the Park Finder or the Water Access Finder or any of our other applications? If you have those, you can share the URLs to them too. We always love to see what you guys have done with our stuff. Wayne has asked which of the widgets will not be available through the Flex Viewer application. Wayne, neither the future application or the current version are actually built on Flex. They're all built on JavaScript. And I don't think, Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, but we haven't removed any functionality with the new UI.
As far as I know, we haven't.
Okay.
Oh, that's the old one.
Must we use the Esri local government model?
No, they can use their own parks point feature class.
If they do that, I'm going to add to that. If they do use their own data, what additional changes are they going to need to make in that configuration file? I think there's some field names and things like that that they would need to fix.
I'll just, hold on. Let me grab my configuration file. So yeah, there's the field name for the primary key features. So we just use the facility ID field. So that will, unless it's the same name, you'll have to change that. And then that goes for the comments layer as well. And then your name, your feature name. So the name of all your parks or facilities, you'll probably need to change that under the operational data settings. And then in the info window header section, you'll need to change the name so it will be the same field as your feature name. You'll need to change that unless your field is called name as well. And then your address field, you'll need to swap out. And then same with the pop-up, the info pop-up settings, those fields will probably need to be changed as well. And then your fields that you're using for your activities, those will need to be changed in the activities area. Anything else?
So yeah, basically it's easiest if you're in the local government information model, but it is possible to configure it against other data sets. Those field names are also all case sensitive.
Yes, so you
fallen into that trap, so that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, so use all caps.
There were some questions about using a geocode service for the addresses, and Lindsay and Scott both addressed that by pointing out that you can use the ArcGIS Online geocoder at no cost, and that is what the application is configured to use by default. I believe you can configure it to use your own geocode service, though, if you have another one. Joshua also said that he noticed that we're using Visual Studio for the editing of the JavaScript, and can we speak to available recommended programs for JavaScript editing? Really, you don't even need Visual Studio. Okay, go for it.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to say you can make these edits in Notepad. You don't need an editor, but I'll let you can speak more to the JavaScript stuff, Lindsay.
Yeah. I mean, some people use Visual Studio Express, which is free. Just provide your email address to Microsoft, and you can use it. Notepad++ is an option that we see a lot of people use. General Notepad is easy to use. I would recommend, there's a variety of free kind of IDEs or integrated developer environments that you can use editing simple JavaScript. You can see when you use Visual Studio, you get different color coding, and usually the better the IDE, the easier it is to see. So I would recommend using something a little bit more than Notepad just to make it easy on yourself. That way you can see any typos that you make. There's only one thing I would never use WordPad. That's just that you'll have a lot of issues if you use WordPad, but Notepad's fine, and any other kind of IDE that's out there will just make it a little bit easier because it has that color coding.
I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this, but is it Roanoke County? Shared a link to their implementation of the Park and Recreation Finder, and if anybody wants to go see a really cool implementation, that's a great link to click on. It looks like they've done some customization with the app, and they've put a really nice skin on it, just showing some of what's possible with this code base. Dan asked, can you cover the part again about what functions consume credits? Oh, and Scott just answered it, that routing is the only one.
Yeah. Yep, routing.
Which it's possible to disable.
Yeah, and the application still works if you don't have routing. So.
And in terms of if you're interested in credit consumption, each route is like 0.1 credits, so it's actually fairly minimal. It's not a big impact.
Scott, if you'd like to talk as well as typing, you can press *6 and unmute yourself. I can see you typing. Nah.
He's in ghost mode.
I see another question coming in here. Scott, Lindsay, do you want to take this one? Per the Esri lifecycle info, it looks like Java's on its way out, and how will that affect services like this one, which users are investing in? Scott, typing.
I think that's actually the Java. I think that's the Java SDK, not the JavaScript API. I'm just looking at. I'm just looking specifically at it. Yeah. Yeah, that's the ArcGIS runtime SDK for Java. So the distinction is it's Java versus JavaScript, which are two different programming languages. So this will not affect our apps. We're heavily investing in JavaScript, and the majority of a lot of the clients you see Esri putting out are in JavaScript these days. So we're good to go.
Okay. That looks like all of the questions and comments. I don't see any more coming in. So I would just like to thank everybody for coming today. We had a lot of really great questions and comments coming in. And I don't have a new meetup to announce. We'll be back in the new year. Keep your eye on the meetups.com website for the schedule for the new year. Scott, Lindsay, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Heather? Scott says, everyone, send us ideas for meetups. You can comment those to us on the meetups website, and we'll collect them there. Ronoki asked if when the new release is coming out. Lindsay, do we have a date for any new events?
Scott's typing. I'll let him answer that.
Oh, okay.
I think it's still TBD or to be decided.
Okay.
It
seems
is
like
coming.
Lately we've been releasing new stuff every few months. I'm not sure when this specific one will be out, but there is new stuff coming out from us all the time.
Yeah. I mean, there will be.
He came off mute.
It took that question to drag me off mute, Allison. No, sorry, everyone. So Lindsay alluded to it. We will have a new release in December of ArcGIS for local government, and it'll be an update that is really focused on 10.3 compatibility and some new offerings, but primarily 10.3 support. The new configurable place finder app that Heather showed you today, that's really a sneak peek of what's coming, and I don't expect that until probably late sometime Q1 2015, because we're just finishing. Actually, we've got some development work to finish up and testing to do. So what you saw was a very early sneak peek of that, and we're working hard to get it done in the first quarter of 2015.
Okie doke.
So the other thing I was going to mention, Allison. Oh, one more thing I was going to mention.
Go ahead.
So we'll try to get a schedule for meetup out, for the first quarter of next year, out in December. In between Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday. We probably won't have one in between the holidays just because it's so busy for everyone. But look, for us to pick back up in January with the monthly meetups and even some meetups at events. Like some of the regional conferences. If you guys have ideas, I asked already, but if you have ideas, please send them to us. We'd be anxious to hear from you what you'd like us to share with you, and then also if you'd like to present, it'd be great to have some users presenting as well too. So just send us ideas, and we'll pull together a schedule for early next year.
Cool. Thanks, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Happy holidays, then, I guess, everybody, and we'll touch base again in the new year. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.